So let's go ahead and get to this this next one, a story we've been following with great interest, and I see that many of you are interested as well. So the Elizabeth Holmes trial started yesterday. Opening arguments were made by both the prosecution and the defense. So this is interesting. Let's go ahead and put this up there on the screen. We went ahead and told you already that Mrs. Holmes is going to claim basically a fake MeToo defense about how her relationship with a person who was actually a subordinate, Sunny Balwani, also worked at that company, bullied her into defrauding investors and, of course, screwing over a lot of people who used her home tests. But the defense is pairing that by trying to seem as if she was a normal business investor. So what they say is this quote, "Failure is not a crime." The defense says Elizabeth Holmes did not go to work every day intending to lie, cheat, and steal. The government would have you believe that her entire company, her entire life is a fraud. Well, I think there's a decent case to be made there.
There's evidence for that, Ms. Holmes.
They say, quote, that she worked herself to the bone for 15 years trying to make lab testing cheaper and more accessible. She poured her heart and soul into that effort. In the end, Theranos failed, and Mrs. Holmes walked away with nothing, but failure is not a crime. Trying your hardest and coming up short is not a crime. So they're trying two different things. Number one, she was just a misguided investor, and she was just did her damnedest and absolutely did her best every single day. Woke up, wanted to create these cheaper blood tests. It didn't work out, and that was what the whole debacle. But the government actually has a pretty good case, as anybody has reviewed the evidence there, Krystal, that actually she did wake up beginning around like year 3. When they realized this technology wasn't going to work and was like, oh, I really like being on all these magazine covers and called the female Steve Jobs, so I'm going to lower my voice and I'm going to wear these black sweaters. And also, she was a billionaire. That seems like a pretty good incentive in order to try and create financial chicanery. So you couple all of that together, and the government and the prosecution, they put together, all of these lists of witnesses and evidence. But you went deep on the text messages of this little Me Too couple.
Yes. So as part of discovery, a lot of her text messages with Sunny Balwani, who, again, as you said, she's basically trying to pin this all on him and use what they're describing as a Svengali defense.
Yes.
So basically, like, I was this helpless young woman and he led me into this fraud, and really I was in this abusive relationship, and so it was all very coercive and it was all on him, not on me. So that's why these text messages are relevant. And it wasn't, I can't take credit, John Carreyrou, who was the reporter from the Wall Street Journal who initially broke this story and was like a dog with a bone on this thing and really exposed the horrendous levels of fraud and lies within that company, starting with Elizabeth Holmes. He dug into these text messages, and the picture you get is not convenient for Elizabeth Holmes' defense that she was just this poor, helpless thing, and it was Sunny Balwani who was really driving the ship and encouraging them to go in this fraudulent direction. Because he, a lot of times, raises concerns, saying, we got to get this figured out. We got to get more of the tests done, because one of the problems was they're supposed to be able to do these finger pricks. Correct. Because the whole thing was like, oh, people hate needles. This will be so much less intrusive. So you just do this finger prick and you can get all this range of test results. Well, the problem was that the finger prick didn't work for most of the tests that people could get. So they were having to still do the old-fashioned, the same thing that any other lab testing company does, draw the blood from the vein and, get a real needle in there at the Walgreens, which was their big company. So Balwani kept expressing to her, like, we got to get these tests figured out. We got to get more of them through the finger prick. And she was a lot more interested in the praise over being on Fortune or being Glamour's Woman of the Year and being on CNBC and being hailed as the female Steve Jobs. She was a lot more interested in that part of the conversation than she was in the part of the conversation that was like, yeah, we got to make sure that the substance of what's going on here matches anything close to what we were portraying it as, both to the press and to the American people, to our own customers, and to the investors who have been led to believe that all these tests are being done through finger pricks.
Right.
There's another element of this, which is that, would be relevant to the case. How many of the tests were inaccurate? because it's not just that they were not being done through the finger prick, it's also that their whole lab was such a disaster that there were a lot of just incorrect tests. People were getting results that were wrong, who relied on this for, important health decisions. And there's some question about what happened here, but the database that stored all of those results, they destroyed those servers. Okay, first they had sent the government, the prosecutors in the case, they sent them a copy of the database, but it was encrypted in a format that basically made it useless, and they didn't give them the encryption key so that they could unlock it at all to look at it. Now, that all sounds very nefarious. On the other hand, the government didn't really try to look at the data until a couple years later, because this case has dragged on for years and years and been pushed off for years and years. But of course, they give the government this sort of like useless data and then immediately destroy the servers. So as part of this case, they don't actually have all the data of those test results and whether or not they're accurate. So obviously that presents a major challenge for the prosecutors here. But again, if you're looking at these text messages, it's, not really convenient for the narrative. And also it's pretty hard and pretty unprecedented to effectively use this Svengali defense, because just because you're in a difficult or abusive relationship, that doesn't mean that you're not culpable for crimes that you commit.
And raising money and defrauding people.
Right.
That's really
so
what it is.
it's a pretty, it's going to be a pretty tough case for her to make. But you can start to see the way that they're trying to engender sympathy for her among the jury. In the opening arguments, her team made sure to mention she's a new mom. And you can sort of see the way that they're portraying this. By the way, at the same time, don't worry, she hasn't lost all her money. She's apparently doing well enough to live while this whole trial is going on. Let's throw this up on the screen. I think this is from CNBC.
Yep.
She's doing well enough to live on the grounds of a $135 million Silicon Valley estate during this trial. So she's still living large, even as her whole empire collapsed around her.
Yeah, there's just kind of a little bit of a beauty to that. I think her husband is independently wealthy, and they married after the entire Theranos debacle. So there you go. It's kind of a fitting place for her to ride all of this out. And as you said, with the prosecution, there is going to be some difficulty, but really all they have to show is that she defrauded people when she took their money if she had some knowledge that the tests themselves were not as efficacious as she was presenting.
Right.
That's really what they have to show. And John Carreyrou himself has basically exposed a decent and threshold in order to show that level of information. But regardless, the trial itself tells us a lot about our economic system, about her, about the media, and so we're going to continue to follow it.
Very much so. I mean, she was the ultimate girl boss.
Yeah,
I actually went to
when CEO.
When I lived in New York, I got invited to this like Glamour Woman of the Year thing. So cringe. And she was there being celebrated as, she was so hyped, like she was the next huge thing. The list of investors, just like a who's who of elites, wealthy elites in America. They all loved the story of this young woman, first billionaire, and they bought into that story. And it also says something about that whole girl boss ethos. It also says a lot about the culture of Silicon Valley, because there is a culture there of like fake it till you make it. And so part of what she has argued in the past, I don't think this is going to factor really into her defense here because it's not a great defense, legally speaking. But what she's argued in the past is basically, look, I didn't do anything different from what the guys were doing. They were lying and stretching the truth as well. And so, But, and it's also like that, I'm sure she's right about that. But also, it's really different when people's lives and health are at stake.
That's the difference. That's product isn't
really. It's not like, the search engine doesn't quite work as well as we claim that it is. It's like, no, you're giving people wrong health information. There's a text message where Balwani tells her that their most critical labs where they're doing the pinprick testing, that they're a disaster. And she says, I know. So, they're very aware that this is all a mess, that it's not nearly what they're portraying it to the public, and people's like important health decisions are at risk here. So that's why this matters.
That's exactly right.
Hey guys, thanks so much for watching.
That's right. Just as a reminder, you can become a premium subscriber today. Watch the full show completely uncut, our reactions to each other's monologues. You get to listen to it. You get to ask us questions, all that good stuff. Link is right there in the description or at breakingpoints.com.
Best of all, great way to say screw you to the mainstream media.